Hi, welcome to Comic Talk. I'm George Washington Boulevard.
And I'm Central Avenue.
This is Comic Talk, Talks Comics. This week we're going to be talking about reboots and new number ones. This is our ongoing series where we just talk about larger issues. So that's what we're talking about this week. So really the thrust of this argument or discussion, I don't think we're going to argue. Let's not argue, man.
Okay, fine.
Let's just talk comics.
Comic Talk, comic talk.
Comic talk, toxic atomic cocks.
So, I feel like Marvel's been the worst about this in recent history. There's fucking number ones all over the place.
Right, Marvel does it all the time.
All the time.
But you know what? It seems to be working.
Yeah. They do have a little bit of leeway because they just got all that Star Wars shit.
Right.
You know, so I mean, they kind of had to.
Right, it makes sense there. Let's just get right to the crux of this, where there's really two opinions here, right?
Sure.
There's sort of the opinion of the continuity hound, the person who really feels a close kinship to like the legacy of the characters, who feel like the constant reboots get in the way of the long-term storytelling for these characters. They feel like the story is starting over on them over and over again while they're trying to just read their favorite character, and they get a little ways and then it starts over, and they get a little ways and it starts over. And then there's the other side, I think, where we probably fall into. I'm just going to lump you into the boat with me and say that you agree here.
I'm on the boat.
So better start rowing. But there's this other side really where, I mean, frankly, I don't even give a shit. Like,
Yeah. If they rebooted it every time a story got a new writer, I'd be perfectly okay with it. I think it'd be pretty cool, actually.
yeah. And I think the divide comes from the same place of a lot of things that we end up talking about, where it's this difference between people who follow creators and people who follow characters. I can see how if what you read every month is Spider-Man, you don't give a shit about who's writing it. You don't follow that. When the writer changes, you go, oh, cool, or oh, damn, but then you just keep getting it. Like, we know lots of these people who will complain that the last 17 issues of Spider-Man have been garbage. Like, oh, I've been reading Spider-Man for 7 years, and the last year and a half has sucked. But, I'm on the side of the fence that says, well, like, the second issue that it sucked, why didn't you stop reading it?
Yeah, stop reading Spider-Man.
Like, it's just...
That goes back to, like, the voting with your dollars thing.
Right.
Like, if it's selling well and it sucks, it's going to keep selling.
Right. But that's probably a whole nother episode that we could actually talk about. Characters versus creators. So look forward to that in the months to come. But... so I think that's where we get the divide, and I think we both firmly come down on like the new number ones are cool. For me, I feel like there's a couple of reasons they're cool. First of all, I think it's way easier for new readers, which is good for the industry.
Definitely, nobody wants to jump in at Spider-Man 767.
Right, it just seems fucking weird, right? It's one thing for us to say to somebody, well, if it says story name issue 1 of 3, you're good. Like, go pick it up. But a new reader just doesn't get that. That doesn't feel right to them. They say, well, but what happened in those other 743 issues? Like, I'm way behind. I'm 700 issues behind. I could never catch up.
Yeah.
Right? So by giving, okay, there's a new story arc, there's a new creator, by just saying, okay, instead of calling that 734, let's just call it number 1, volume 5. By doing that, it signals, I think, subconsciously or even consciously to like a new reader, it's okay to start here. Like you're giving them insight into how comics actually work, right? Because you're not it's absurd to think, to have read Batman 705, like you would have needed to read 1 through 704. Like,
right.
It's pure absurdity. Like
it's not a TV show.
Right. If you're somebody who reads comics, you understand that What you need to know is the origin, which you don't need to read the origin. You just need to kind of understand it in a general sense, which you can get off of Wikipedia. If you want to know Spider-Man, you need to know that he was bit by a radioactive spider.
And Uncle Ben and shit.
Uncle Ben died, and now he felt responsible for it. That's all you need. He's Spider-Man. And then you just start reading wherever the fuck you want, right? And you guys know this because you're watching our show, and we know this, but a new reader doesn't know that. So to get them to understand where to start, you need to make it really clear. And I think just new number ones makes it really clear.
Absolutely.
So are there arguments that you can think of for like negativity on this front that like we could agree with, or that people like us could maybe see drawbacks happening here?
I mean, it gets kind of hard to keep track, I guess, after a while. That's just really like a matter of cataloging and shit, which is your own thing that you kind of thrust upon yourself.
Right.
You know, so whatever.
Yeah, I think you have a point there where they need to, if they're going to keep doing these number ones like this, they need to come up with a better way of differentiating the different volumes. Even if it just means putting the volume actually on the issue.
Cover.
Like the way, because when you're looking online for these things, if you go to Wikipedia and like look up Wolverine, right, you'll see it's separated into volumes. If you Green Arrow, whoever, you'll see them separated, volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. And one of the weird things is that used to mean something else. You know, it used to just be like, you know, issues 300 through 350 was volume 5 or whatever. But that needs to go. Now it needs to be, when it starts over at number 1, I think it needs to be like issue number 1, volume 7, volume 8. Or alternatively, they could use different naming conventions for these things. You know, they could. Marvel does this, I think, better than DC does by a huge margin because they've been doing it a little longer. You know, the Mighty Thor.
Yeah. Amazing Spider-Man.
Right.
Yeah.
Incredible Spider-Man. Astonishing X-Men. I think that's a good way. It can get confusing, but comparatively, I think it's a good trick to keep things a little easier to understand.
You know, it's different because it has a different title, you know.
Right. And it just makes it easier in conversation, too, because you can say, have you read Astonishing X-Men? Have you read The Mighty Thor? Have you read Thor, right? Like, they're just different. You know they're different because they have a different fucking name.
Right.
Uncanny X-Men, Uncanny X-Force, yeah.
And it gets to be kind of a pain in the ass, honestly, when you're going back through these longer runs that span through, like, you know, 2 or 3 writers or so. Like, if I just wanted to read the Wade Flash, I would have to do a little bit of research.
You have to research, right? Yeah. Agreed. It's a complete pain in the ass. So if it would have just been when he took over on Flash, if it was just Flash number 1 with Mark Waid, like at least you could look up like Mark Waid Flash.
And that would be a series by itself.
Number 1, right. And you could go from there.
You're not starting at number 42 and then continuing to 76 or, you know, whatever the case may be.
Right. Well, because ultimately, for somebody like us, or for somebody who's reading regularly, the number is arbitrary. Like, it could say 473, and it doesn't matter to me because I fucking understand what's going on and I follow it. Like, I'm a fan. So if you want to call it number 1, so like the new guy can understand it, fucking do that. Like, it doesn't change anything. Like, if the story would have been the exact same in the book, or, you know, like he said, here, now you're the writer, go. They could call it number 1, or they could call it the next number in the issue. Like, what's the difference, right?
And I don't think you even necessarily have to reboot every time you have a number 1. I think that's another thing.
Right.
Like, you know, you put a new creative team on it, and, you know, you assume it's going to be a little bit different because it's a new number 1, but, you know, if you want to tie in, like, a little bit from the last issue that came out before that, that's fine, too.
Well, and we see this in, you know, all different Marvel. We got some of the titles I've read so far, Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, Miss Marvel, Ant-Man.
Yeah.
All 3 of those are number 1s. Unbeatable Squirrel Girl even makes a joke about it, our second number 1 this year. Only our second number 1 this year. Right on the cover, right? But you go in and you read, and it just keeps going. It's the same creators. It's the same thing. But it's a good place to jump in, so it's a new number 1. On that front, that could be confusing to a new reader, right? Because it's like the story is continuing, but now there's 2 number ones. So
Right, but I mean, you have to consider like somebody just walking into the comic shop for the first time. Like, there's not going to be that 11th month gap from the walk in. It's like, oh, the last time I was here, I saw Unbeatable Squirrel Girl #1. You
Right.
know, it's like they're either going to pick it up or they're not.
right, yeah, I agree. I think overall it's a lot better. I'm thinking of like the people who are just maybe this year getting into comics, right? So they read, let's say they've read Unbeatable Squirrel Girl for the last year.
Mm-hmm.
They get to number 12 or wherever it was, and they come into the shop. It's not there for a month. They come in the next month thinking, okay, it's got to be here now. Where's my number 13? And there's a number 1 again.
Mm-hmm.
Now what? Like, you know, that's a little weird. Like, am I supposed to read that? Is that the thing I already read? Look through it. It seems like it's the next. Like, I can see how that could be maybe just as confusing for somebody who's been reading for a short period of time
Sure.
as where to get in the first place might be for somebody who's never read at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess there are a few drawbacks here and there.
But that's sort of the exception.
It
rather
probably
than
is the
rule.
exception, yeah. I
mean,
think
given
maybe
we
that's
had-
going too far with the number ones. Like, that
Yeah.
was what I'm saying. Like, you can get too ridiculous where in the middle of a run of the same creative team, number 1 again, it's bizarre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but again, you know, this stuff doesn't really happen that often. I mean, it's really just a product of the Secret Wars thing, and just the fact that title came out. Hawkeye was the same way. Hawkeye's
Right.
had a couple number ones, and it's just, yeah, again, crossover shit fucking up everything else.
Right.
We have a video about that. Check it out.
We do. It's like last week, I think.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, something like that. Hawkeye's an interesting example. It's still the same story, and Lemire took that story over right from Fraction. And right, like that was all one continuation, wasn't it? More or less.
I didn't read the Fraction stuff, but I know the Lemire came out when the Fraction was wrapping up.
Right.
So I think it's different.
My understanding though is that it's like supposed to continue from what Fraction was doing.
Okay.
So I could be wrong, but I mean that's a case where we now have 3 number ones in like a continuing story,
Mm-hmm.
where it's changed creators once and then didn't change creators. So I suppose the new number ones is what I'm trying to get at is it comes with its own host of problems, but I think they're not as bad of problems.
Yeah.
I think overall it's an easier way to understand what's going on.
I mean, I wouldn't say negligible, but definitely close.
Yeah. So what about reboots? Let's talk about that just a little bit more, because there is a difference between a new number 1 and a reboot of a character.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, let's take like what most people would call a bad example. I'm going to throw out a couple. First of all, Wally West,
Sure.
where he went from being, you know, the old Flash that everybody loves to the young, inconsequentially, in my opinion, black kid, but consequentially because he was written in sort of a racist fashion, or at least what could be conceived as racist. You know, he's graffitiing a wall.
Yeah,
and,
right.
like, oh, because he's black.
Come
Is
the
it
fuck on.
because he's black? Right. So, but another couple examples would be like New Wolverine, where they've rebooted that character and it's just X-23, a female, now is Wolverine, or Jane Foster as Thor, right? Right? But then also reboots of characters like Superman now is still Superman, but he's kind of not, right? Like
Yeah.
they
The
kind
Batman
of
when New 52 came around, like he's younger than he was prior to that, but it's still not the beginning years for him.
right. So I think reboots actually probably piss off readers in general even more than like the slew of number ones.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about them in general? Do you have some specific examples of ones that you like or don't like, or maybe a larger overall view?
You know, I think sometimes, like, when you want to drastically change the tone of the book, I think it's called for. I don't like when people do it, like, just to do it. Like, that's the way the New 52 felt, is that we're just going to reboot everything just so we can say that we rebooted everything and give everybody a clean slate. And not to mention, you know, little bits of that are just going to piss people off. Like, a bunch of people were pissed off that it was going back to Barry Allen as the Flash. Because Wally West had been the Flash, like, up to that point. And everybody loved Wally West, you know, and Barry at the time was seen as kind of the more boring one, you know, like kind of old school. And then, yeah, Barry just keeps getting shoved down your throat. Like, they came out with the Flash TV show, and that was, again, Barry Allen, and then they're going to have the movie, and that's going to be, again, Barry Allen. And people like Wally.
Right.
Just fucking quit it.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Yeah, and even if he's, like, different, like, I think people would like... Do you think people would like a different Wally more than the same Barry? You know what I mean? Like, if we had... a black Wally West who maybe was a little, let me put this down, edgier, right? Do you think people would like that more, or would we just have like the opposite problem of, this isn't my Wally West, right? Like, would it even be any better?
Yeah, it's hard to differentiate sometimes between like actual public opinion and just the vocal minority, as people like to say. But, I mean, I think, again, like, if you're going to do something like that and you're going to reboot a character, like, you should bring something to the table with it. You know, you should be trying something that's a little bit outside of what you could do if you didn't reboot it.
Right. Otherwise, what's the point, right?
Right. And I don't see bringing back, like, an old Flash to be really that. Like, it may as well have been fucking Jay Garrick. Like, who gives a shit at that point?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Now, there's also this whole thing with rebooting characters with, like, gender swaps or nationality changes, like Wally West being a black kid, or Spider-Man, Miles Morales, he's half black, half Latino.
Sure.
We have Thor is now a woman, Wolverine is a woman, and we see a lot of backlash against this kind of thing. So first of all, how do you feel about that? Does that bother you? Does it feel forced?
A little bit. I feel like it's a reaction to people that don't really give a shit about comics unless they have something to be pissed off about. It's just absolutely absurd. Like, the one that really got to me is like when they redrew a bunch of superheroes with like realistic body standards and stuff. It's like, these are fucking like superheroes. Like, why don't you just redraw Olympic gymnasts with realistic body standards?
Right.
It doesn't make any fucking sense.
Realistic for a superhero, for most of them, is going to be pretty much the way they look.
Right.
Because that's what they do, right? Like,
if you're a dude, like, lurking around in the shadows, you know, beating up bad guys, you're probably going to be, like, you know, 6'3", fucking 220.
Right,
That's probably the dude that you are.
Yeah.
So that's just absurd. And, yeah, I don't know why comics have really felt the brunt of that whole thing. It kind of bothers me. But I'm not against the idea of having a female Thor or a female Wolverine or anything. You know, I think it's something that probably should have realistically been done a long time ago, and they just didn't.
Right.
But the all at once thing makes it feel a little bit forced.
Right. Well, I think it is forced.
Yeah.
I'll agree there. Like, it's okay, we're going to fix this perceived problem.
It's like when you're in high school and somebody shows up and they're just like a goth kid one day.
Right.
You know?
Right. Like, I'm totally like this. This is my thing now.
Yeah.
Right. What do you mean? This is me. This is my real...
This has always been me.
This is my real reality personality. I've just been hiding this whole time.
In Hot Topic.
I found myself. I think people get really caught up in like the name that's on the cover, which is why they do it, right? Like, okay, the X-23 Wolverine. Let's use that as an example. It doesn't matter if you've read it or not. So it says Wolverine on the title, right? But it's the character X-23. But, okay, so what if it was said X-23 on the title?
Yeah.
Right? It would still be the same book. It would be the same fucking book.
Yeah, that sort of like transference of name recognition to a completely other person is a bit absurd sometimes.
Right. It is absurd, but that's how you sell the comic. Like, people know who Wolverine is, like, but they don't know who X-23 is. So if you're not doing a Wolverine book, and Wolverine is now Old Man Logan because you want to do that, which is what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
He's more interesting as an old grumpy guy anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so now there's nobody in Wolverine. So just take X-23 and call her Wolverine, and boom, problem solved. Like, I don't see why that's a problem.
I thought it was a little bit more graceful in like All New Hawkeye when they're introducing Kate as All New Hawkeye.
Right.
You know,
Right.
All New Wolverine would be fine.
Well, it is All New Wolverine.
Okay.
But, you know, it's just like All New Hawkeye where it's little. You know, it's Wolverine and Hawkeye.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great example of one where they're doing the same thing, they want a female. She's like Asian American too, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, so, they're bringing in another ethnic character. They're replacing Hawkeye with her, but it's done really gracefully, and it's a great story. So fuck it. Like,
who doesn't... They have a storyline to, like, make that change.
Right. Who doesn't want a good story in comics? Like, that's the whole fucking point, right?
Right.
But then we have other examples where people have felt like Thor, right? Jason Aaron's run with Thor, where Jane Foster's become Thor, has gotten a lot of negative appeal, like a lot of negativity in the reading press. Not like the outside press. That's going to go back and forth. Like, they don't know what the fuck's going on in comics. They don't often.
They don't even pay attention. I doubt the same people that were bitching about it even realize that Jane Foster's Thor now.
Right. Well, and the people that they don't understand why. They didn't read it. They just go, "Girl, Thor, that's stupid." Yeah. Like, Thor's a dude. So fuck them. Forget that. But within the comic reading demographic, what I've seen the most is just complaints that it's not a very good comic.
Yeah, it wasn't that good.
Right? We read the first new one, The Mighty Thor, and it's just not very fucking good. It has nothing to do with the fact that female Thor, and I see this a lot too, where the ones that are kind of forced like this, like Wally West is another example, they're just not done very well a lot of times. You know, it's hard to make a new character feel as good as the old character that used to be in that title. That's just hard. Like, that's hard to write that in an interesting way. So I think a lot of times people misunderstand or mistake, like, especially like the feminist crowd or
the BuzzFeed community.
Yeah, they misunderstand. Oh, look, you change Thor and then it doesn't sell well because it's a female. No, it doesn't sell well because it's not very good.
Right.
Like, it's important to see the difference there, because sometimes changes are good. Like, All New Wolverine is pretty fucking good, and I think it's probably going to sell well and do pretty well, and probably
Hawkeye. It's
probably last. Hawkeye's awesome. Kate Bishop or whatever her name is, she's an awesome Hawkeye. I'm excited about it, right?
Yeah.
So it just depends on the issue, really. All right, well, I guess that'll wrap that one up. Check back with us next week when we talk about the collector's market and variants. Talk about how that affects comics in general, and just our opinion on that whole thing. Check back and you'll see what I'm talking about. Otherwise, what do you guys think about reboots? Do you have any specific examples of ones you liked or didn't like? And also, the number ones. Are you the kind of person who follows? I would be interested, actually, if any of the people who watch our stuff follow, like, characters. I don't know if you're out there or not. I don't know if we appeal to the kind of people who read based on their characters. I'd like to know that. Like, so let us know if you follow characters or creators mostly. Just give us a one-word comment. That would be totally enough. I would love to at least get creators or characters, or even if somebody else has already done it down there, just like theirs. Just do something. I just want some sort of count. I would love to see it. Yeah?
Yeah.
Do that. Come on, you fuckers. Do it. Other than that, what else do we got going on? Oh, give us some examples of some other stuff that we could do for this series, Talks Comics. What are some other larger issues or ideas that we could discuss about comics in general, about the industry, about writing, art, any of that kind of stuff.
Anything.
Metafiction. Just give us some ideas on things we could talk about that you'd like us to discuss in this sort of format. We're kind of loose and open, and we will do that.
Facebook, Twitter.